The holographic presentation room of the Interstellar Research Complex trembled with an artificial calm that belied the storm brewing beneath its pristine surface. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her dark eyes reflecting the cascading data streams that had just dismantled 5 years of groundbreaking research. Around her, the council members of the Kralthor Research Consortium watched with a calculated indifference that felt more like a predatory silence. "The discrepancies in your xenobiological adaptation research are irrefutable," proclaimed Zerakel, the lead investigative coordinator, her crystalline translator rendering the alien language into crisp, emotionless standard communication. "Your methodology demonstrates significant inconsistencies that render your entire body of work invalid." Alina knew every centimeter of her research intimately. Each data point, each microscopic cellular reaction had been meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and verified through multiple independent systems. The holographic displays continued to scroll, seemingly damning evidence of research misconduct, fabricated data points, and fundamental methodological failures. Her fingers, almost imperceptibly, traced the edge of her research tablet. Something felt wrong. Not just wrong, impossibly constructed. The massive circular chamber, designed to host some of the most critical scientific discussions in the known galaxy, seemed to compress around her. Translucent data walls shimmered with complex algorithmic patterns, each one carefully constructed to appear as irrefutable evidence of her professional destruction. Zerakel continued, her multi-segmented communication appendages moving with a choreographed precision. "Your research on cross-species genetic adaptation mechanisms has been completely invalidated. The External Review Board has determined that your findings are not only incorrect, but potentially dangerous if further pursued." Dangerous. The word hung in the air like a carefully placed blade. Alina's mind raced through the intricate details of her work. She had spent years developing a revolutionary approach to understanding genetic transfer mechanisms between different biological systems. Her research promised to unlock potential medical treatments that could save countless lives across multiple species. More importantly, she had evidence, concrete, verifiable evidence, that contradicted every single claim being presented. The other council members remained silent, their various physiological forms representing a dozen different species. Some appeared as holographic projections, others as physical entities with complex biological structures that defied traditional understanding. Each watched her with a mixture of clinical detachment and something else, something that felt like anticipation. "I request a full data review," Alina said, her voice steady. "Not a plea, but a statement. The methodological approach I used has been standard in xenobiological research for the past 3 interstellar cycles. My findings have been peer-reviewed and independently verified." Zerakel's translator emitted a sound that might have been a laugh in another context. "Verification is precisely what has exposed the fundamental flaws in your research, Dr. Rodriguez. The computational analysis demonstrates clear manipulation of core data sets." But Elena was no longer listening. Her eyes had caught something, a microscopic pattern in the data stream that seemed deliberately placed. Not a mistake, not an error, something intentional. The chamber's ambient temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Elena realized in that moment that this was not a scientific review. This was an orchestrated elimination. Her mind began connecting threads, subtle connections that most would overlook. The specific research she had been conducting threatened certain established scientific paradigms. Her work challenged long-standing assumptions about genetic adaptability that multiple research consortiums had built entire theoretical frameworks around. This was not about scientific integrity. This was about protecting existing power structures. "I will appeal this decision," she said quietly, her voice carrying a quiet certainty that momentarily silenced the room. "Every single data point will be reviewed, independently, comprehensively." Zerakel's crystalline form flickered. Was that a moment of uncertainty? Elena Rodriguez understood something profound in that moment. Scientific truth was not determined by consensus, but by relentless, principled investigation. and her investigation was just beginning. The holographic displays continued their elaborate dance of seemingly damning data. But beneath the surface, a deeper current was starting to move, a current that would soon become a transformative tide. The research station on Europa gleamed like a silver promise against the endless darkness of the moon's frozen landscape. Kilometers of solid ice stretched in every direction, creating a natural fortress of isolation. Most would see exile. Elena Rodriguez saw an opportunity. Automated systems hummed quietly as she began transforming the compact research facility into something far more sophisticated than its original design. Solar arrays positioned to capture minimal light from distant Jupiter supplemented the station's power grid. Quantum communication boosters, carefully assembled from components she had salvaged from her previous research, began extending her reach far beyond the expected limitations. Each movement was calculated, precise. The station's primary laboratory resembled a technological ecosystem more than a traditional research space. Holographic interfaces danced with complex algorithmic patterns, while advanced cooling systems maintained an environment perfect for delicate computational work. Custom-built quantum processors, some designed by Elena herself, began the painstaking process of analyzing the data from her invalidated research. Invalidated, she muttered to herself, the word tasting like a challenge rather than a defeat. Her first task was reconstruction. Not of her reputation, that would come later, but of the intricate data sets that had been so carefully dismantled. Each deleted file, each supposedly discredited research log became a puzzle piece. Most scientists would have been overwhelmed. Elena saw a map. The communication systems she developed were nothing short of revolutionary. Encrypted channels that moved like liquid intelligence through seemingly impenetrable networks. She was building something more than a communication system. She was constructing a method of investigation that would leave no trace. Outside, Europa's surface reflected Jupiter's massive presence, a constant reminder of the vast, complex universe that existed beyond institutional limitations. The moon's icy exterior mirrored Elena's current state, seemingly dormant, but harboring incredible potential just beneath the surface. Days blended into weeks. Her research tablet became an extension of her own analytical process. She began mapping the subtle inconsistencies in the research review. Minute details that most would overlook. A decimal point slightly out of place. A reference citation subtly altered. Patterns emerged that spoke of something far more deliberate than scientific disagreement. The station's environmental systems provided a metaphorical sanctuary. Layers of protection, both physical and digital, created a perfect environment for deep, uninterrupted investigation. Thermal regulators maintained a consistent temperature, while advanced filtration systems ensured complete isolation from external contamination. Elena's approach was methodical. She divided her investigation into multiple parallel streams. One track focused on reconstructing her original research data. Another began tracing the complex network of relationships within the Krall-4 Research Consortium. The third, and most delicate, started mapping the potential motivations behind her professional elimination. Communication with the outside world was carefully managed. Short, encrypted burst transmissions that appeared as routine scientific data transfers. To any external monitoring system, she was just another researcher conducting mundane work in a remote location. But beneath this calm exterior, a storm was brewing. Her quantum processors began revealing something extraordinary. The data manipulation was not random. It was too precise, too carefully constructed to be a simple academic dispute. Someone, or something, had gone to extraordinary lengths to discredit her specific line of research. A holographic display materialized, showing intricate connection maps between various research institutions. Lines of influence, financial support, and academic dependency created a complex web that most would find incomprehensible. Elena saw it differently. To her, it was a landscape waiting to be navigated. "They thought isolation would stop me," she said softly to the empty laboratory. The statement carried no anger, just a clinical determination that was far more dangerous. The research station's systems continued their quiet work. Advanced cooling mechanisms managed the heat generated by intense computational processes. Quantum entanglement communication systems stood ready, waiting for the precise moment they would be needed. Elena Rodriguez was not waiting to be vindicated. She was preparing to conduct the most comprehensive scientific investigation in interstellar history. Outside, Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance across Europa's sky, a silent witness to the transformation happening within the small, seemingly insignificant research station. Quantum encryption was an art form, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez was about to compose a masterpiece. Her communication protocol moved like a ghost through the interstellar research networks, subtle, undetectable, yet precisely targeted. The first transmission went to Dr. Krelvox, a brilliant xenobiological researcher from the Andromeda Collaborative. His work on genetic adaptation had been similarly suppressed 3 interstellar cycles ago. The message appeared as a routine data packet, buried within layers of seemingly mundane scientific correspondence. Most communication networks would miss it entirely. Krell's research station orbited a volatile neutron star, providing both energy and isolation. When he decoded the message, his 7-fingered hands trembled. The transmission contained fragments of research that mirrored his own experience: systematic suppression, data manipulation, institutional silencing. Across the galaxy, other researchers began receiving similar encrypted communications. Dr. Lyra Chen, whose breakthrough in quantum neural mapping had been abruptly terminated. Professor Zorn, a silicon-based life form whose research on cross-species communication protocols had been mysteriously discredited. Each received a carefully constructed communication that seemed to emerge from the scientific ether. Elena's approach was brilliant in its simplicity. She wasn't building a traditional network. She was creating a distributed intelligence system. Each researcher would contribute a piece of a much larger puzzle without fully understanding the entire picture. Her quantum communication protocol adapted constantly. It learned, shifted, transformed. Like a living organism, it moved through communication channels, leaving no consistent trace. Firewalls designed to block such transmissions found themselves facing an intelligence that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The research complex on Europa had transformed. What appeared to be a standard communication array was actually a sophisticated intelligence gathering system. Thermal dispersal technologies and quantum masking made the station virtually undetectable. Elena had turned her exile into a strategic command center. Each researcher who received her communication faced a choice. Most scientific professionals would delete an unexpected transmission. But these were not ordinary researchers. They were individuals who had been systematically marginalized, their groundbreaking work suppressed by institutional power structures that valued control over discovery. Dr. Krelvox was the first to respond. His reply was not a direct communication, but a series of encrypted data fragments. Research logs, suppressed experimental results, financial transaction records that suggested a deeper, more complex manipulation of scientific institutions. Elena's quantum processors began weaving these fragments into a comprehensive narrative. Each piece of data was cross-referenced, analyzed, verified through multiple computational models. What was emerging was not just a story of individual suppression. It was a systematic approach to controlling scientific discovery. The network grew organically, not through traditional hierarchical structures, but through a distributed, intelligent system that adapted and evolved. Researchers who had been isolated now found themselves part of something larger. A quiet revolution was taking shape. Professor Zorn's contribution was particularly valuable. As a silicon-based life form, his perspective on data manipulation was fundamentally different from carbon-based researchers. His computational models revealed patterns of institutional control that others might have missed. Dr. Lyra Chen's neural mapping research provided another critical piece. Her work suggested that the suppression of scientific discovery was not just institutional, it was potentially designed to limit collective intellectual evolution. Elena understood the profound nature of what was happening. This was more than an investigation. This was a systematic dismantling of institutional barriers that had limited scientific progress for generations. The communication network continued to expand. Each transmission was a carefully constructed puzzle piece. Each researcher became both a contributor and a guardian of emerging information. They were not just sharing data. They were building a new framework of scientific collaboration. Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance outside the research station, casting periodic light across the icy European landscape. Inside, Elena Rodriguez was orchestrating something unprecedented. A quiet revolution was taking shape, one quantum transmission at a time. The Whisper network was growing, and no institutional firewall could stop it. The quantum processor hummed with a quiet intensity that seemed almost alive. Layers of code moved like liquid intelligence, flowing through digital pathways that most computational systems would never comprehend. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had created something far beyond a standard infiltration system. She had engineered a living information network. Her development workspace resembled an intricate ecosystem of technology. Holographic interfaces danced with complex algorithmic patterns, each representation a carefully constructed layer of her infiltration strategy. The walls of the research station seemed to pulse with potential energy, the very air charged with intellectual anticipation. The core of her system was deceptively simple in its complexity. Unlike traditional infiltration protocols that sought to breach or destroy, Elena's approach was more nuanced. She was creating a system that would understand, adapt, and ultimately transform the communication networks of the Kralthor Research Consortium. Each line of code was a carefully composed note in an elaborate technological symphony. The first layer of the system was an adaptive camouflage protocol. It didn't just mimic existing communication patterns. It studied them, learned from them, became indistinguishable from legitimate research transmissions. Quantum encryption created multiple simultaneous states of existence, making traditional tracking methods obsolete. Dr. Krelvox's previous contributions proved crucial. His research on quantum communication resonance provided a foundational framework that Elena expanded into something revolutionary. The system could now move through communication networks like water, formless, adaptive, impossible to contain. Computational models began to reveal deeper patterns. The Kralthor's communication infrastructure wasn't just a network. It was an interconnected organism of information, with hierarchical structures that seemed impenetrable. Most researchers would see an impasse. Elena saw an opportunity. Her approach broke fundamental rules of digital infiltration. Instead of forcing entry, she would become part of the system itself. Microscopic information packets began to integrate themselves into the consortium's communication infrastructure. They weren't viruses or traditional malware. They were intelligent fragments of code that could learn, adapt, and transform. The research station's cooling systems worked overtime, managing the immense computational heat generated by this unprecedented approach. Thermal dispersal technologies ensured that no external monitoring system could detect the intense processing happening within the isolated European facility. Each transmission was a carefully constructed puzzle piece. Data moved in quantum-entangled states, existing simultaneously across multiple communication channels. Traditional firewalls found themselves facing an intelligence that defied conventional understanding. Professor Zorn's silicon-based computational models provided critical insights. His unique perspective on information flow allowed Elena to develop infiltration protocols that went beyond traditional binary thinking. The system could now interpret communication patterns at a level of complexity that seemed almost sentient. Days blended into weeks. The technological symphony continued its quiet, relentless composition. Microscopic vulnerabilities began to emerge in the Kralthor's communication infrastructure, not through destructive interference, but through a gradual, intelligent integration. It was less an invasion and more a transformation, a subtle rewriting of communication protocols from within. Dr. Lyra Chen's neural mapping research proved invaluable. Her understanding of complex information networks allowed Elena to develop an infiltration system that could anticipate institutional responses. The code didn't just react, it predicted. The quantum processors continued their intricate dance. Holographic displays showed complex networks of information flow, each transmission a carefully calculated movement in an elaborate strategic performance. Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance outside, casting periodic light across the icy European landscape. Inside the research station, something unprecedented was taking shape. A technological symphony that would fundamentally challenge how information could be understood, controlled, and transformed. Elena Rodriguez was not just investigating. She was rewriting the very rules of scientific communication. The Whisper network had become something far more powerful. An intelligent, adaptive system that moved through institutional barriers like water through stone. Slowly, inevitably, transforming everything in its path. The Kralthor Central Research Hub hung in space like a massive crystalline network, its communication arrays pulsing with millions of data transmissions per second. It was the nerve center of the most advanced research consortium in 3 galactic sectors, a testament to institutional power and scientific might. No one noticed when the first subtle changes began. It started with microscopic inconsistencies. Communication lag times that were barely perceptible. Data packets that seemed to shift imperceptibly. The hub's primary monitoring systems registered nothing unusual, a testament to the sophistication of Elena Rodriguez's infiltration strategy. Dr. Hilara Vex, the chief communication coordinator, first sensed something was wrong during a routine interdepartmental conference. Her holographic projection flickered, just for a millisecond. But it was enough to trigger her extensive diagnostic protocols. Run a full systems check, she instructed the Central Artificial Intelligence. The AI began its comprehensive scan, unable to detect the intelligent information network that was slowly transforming its infrastructure. Across different research stations, similar anomalies began to emerge. A research team studying quantum entanglement found their data streams developing unexpected interference patterns. Computational models that had been stable for cycles suddenly produced inexplicable variations. The brilliance of Elena's approach lay in its subtlety. She wasn't destroying the system. She was fundamentally altering its communication paradigm. Each transmission carried microscopic packets of adaptive code that slowly rewrote the consortium's fundamental communication protocols. In the Epsilon Quadrant Research Station, Dr. Krell-Vox watched with carefully contained excitement. The data patterns emerging from the Kralthor hub matched precisely with the predictions he and Elena had discussed during their encrypted communications. The first real indication of a larger problem came when a critical research proposal vanished from the central database. Not deleted, simply transformed. Its core data remained, but the contextual information had been subtly altered. Institutional memory was becoming fluid, unpredictable. Communication delays began to increase, marginally at first, just enough to be noticeable to those with the most sensitive instruments. Research teams found themselves repeating transmissions, double-checking data that had previously been instantaneously reliable. Deep within the Kralthor hub, artificial intelligence systems began to develop unexpected cognitive dissonance. Their primary directive was to maintain information integrity, but the infiltration was so sophisticated that their standard diagnostic protocols found nothing to correct. Dr. Hilara Vex escalated her investigation. What had begun as a minor curiosity was becoming a significant institutional concern. She assembled a team of the consortium's most advanced communication specialists. Their initial findings were perplexing. "The system is changing," one specialist reported, "but not in any way we can definitively identify." Jupiter's light continued to dance across Europa's icy surface, casting long shadows across Elena's research station. Inside, quantum processors continued their silent, relentless work. Each computational cycle brought the Kralthor consortium closer to a fundamental transformation they couldn't yet comprehend. The tremors were just beginning. Research teams across multiple stations began to experience inexplicable phenomena. Data sets that had been stable for generations now showed subtle, almost imperceptible variations. Computational models developed unexpected emergent behaviors. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more profound. The Kralthor Consortium had built its reputation on absolute information control. They had systematically suppressed research that challenged their established paradigms. Now, their own communication infrastructure was becoming a living, evolving entity that defied their ability to control or understand. Dr. Hilaire Vex realized something fundamental was changing. This was more than a technical anomaly. This was a complete reimagining of how scientific information could be collected, processed, and understood. The first tremor had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. The interdiction team approached Europa like a predatory swarm. 6 specialized vessels, each equipped with the most advanced neutralization technology in the known galaxy. Their mission was simple: eliminate the potential threat represented by Dr. Elena Rodriguez. What they didn't understand was that the threat was far more complex than they could comprehend. The lead vessel, a massive crystalline structure that could slice through quantum barriers, began its approach vector. Advanced sensor arrays probed the research station's defenses, searching for vulnerabilities. Commander Zara Lin reviewed the mission parameters with clinical precision: neutralization, extraction, elimination. Elena Rodriguez watched their approach with a calm that would have unnerved the interdiction team had they been able to perceive her. Her research station was no longer just a scientific facility. It had become a living system, an adaptive network that anticipated rather than responded. The first wave of approach sensors found themselves redirected, their data streams subtly manipulated before they could even register a complete scan. Approach vector compromised, the lead vessel's communication system reported. The words appeared clinically on multiple display screens, but something was different. The text seemed to shimmer, to move in ways that defied standard communication protocols. Commander Zara Lin's first indication that something was fundamentally wrong came when the vessel's primary communication systems began to develop unexpected cognitive dissonance. Navigation protocols that had been stable for generations suddenly produced inexplicable variations. The 6 vessels moved in a carefully constructed formation, a tactical approach developed over centuries of interdiction operations. But something was changing. Microscopic variations began to emerge in their synchronized movement. Elena had done more than create a defensive system. She had developed an adaptive intelligence that could interact with and transform technological networks at their most fundamental level. The first vessel's quantum shielding began to develop unexpected resonance patterns. Communication channels that should have been instantaneous now carried subtle delays. Computational models that had been reliable for generations started to produce unexpected results. Recalibrate primary systems, Commander Zara Lin instructed. But the instruction itself became transformed as it moved through the communication network. Words shifted. Meanings became fluid. Dr. Krell-Vox, monitoring the encounter from his distant research station, observed with scientific detachment. The computational models he and Elena had developed were performing precisely as predicted. Each vessel was becoming less of a unified system and more of an evolving, unpredictable entity. The research station on Europa appeared unchanged. No visible defensive systems emerged. No traditional weapons activated. Instead, the entire approach became a complex dance of information, of subtle transformations that defied conventional understanding. Quantum entanglement became a weapon more powerful than any physical defense. Commander Zara Lin realized something profound was happening. This was not a traditional confrontation. This was a fundamental reimagining of how technological systems could interact, could defend, could exist. The interdiction team's most advanced scanning systems found themselves unable to generate a consistent threat assessment. Each scan produced different results. Computational models became increasingly unstable. What should have been a straightforward neutralization mission was becoming something far more complex. Elena Rodriguez had transformed her isolation into the most sophisticated defensive system ever conceived. The vessels began to lose their precise formation. Communication channels developed unexpected interference patterns. Navigation systems started to produce conflicting approach vectors. What had been a predatory swarm was becoming a collection of increasingly confused technological entities. Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance outside, casting periodic light across the icy European landscape. Inside the research station, something unprecedented was taking shape. A confrontation that was less about physical conflict and more about the fundamental nature of intelligence, of adaptation. The interdiction team had come to eliminate a threat. They were about to discover they had become part of something they could never understand. Commander Zeralin's final transmission was a model of scientific understatement. Operational parameters have become unpredictable. Beneath those words, unnoticed, the entire technological approach was being systematically transformed. The moment of revelation arrived with a precision that defied conventional understanding. Simultaneously across 12 different interstellar research institutions, communication systems began to unpack a complex web of hidden information. What had been carefully concealed for generations now emerged with crystal clarity, a systematic pattern of research manipulation that stretched across multiple scientific disciplines. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from her research station on Europa as the first layers of institutional deception began to unravel. Her network of marginalized researchers had become something far more powerful, a distributed intelligence system capable of comprehensive institutional analysis. The first wave of revelations targeted the Krall-Thor Consortium's xenobiological research archives. Decades of suppressed research materialized in scientific databases worldwide. Falsified datasets were placed alongside original, unaltered research logs. The contrast was devastating. Dr. Krell Vox coordinated the initial data release from his neutron star research station. His silicon-based computational models had been instrumental in creating a release mechanism that would be impossible to contain or suppress. Each data packet carried multiple layers of verification, making traditional institutional damage control impossible. Research foundations that had previously dismissed or marginalized critical studies now found themselves facing a comprehensive exposure of their systematic misconduct. Financial transaction records emerged alongside research logs. Grant allocations, peer review manipulations, strategic research suppressions all became visible. The exposure was not just about individual research projects. It revealed a comprehensive strategy of controlling scientific discovery across multiple species and research disciplines. Institutions that had built their reputation on scientific integrity found themselves under unprecedented scrutiny. Professor Zorn's contribution proved particularly crucial. His unique perspective on information networks allowed for a release mechanism that would continue to unfold even if attempts were made to shut down initial data streams. Most institutions would have attempted to suppress such information. The Krall-Thor Consortium's initial response was calculated silence, but their communication networks had already been fundamentally transformed by Elena's infiltration strategy. Every attempt to control the narrative found itself redirected, transformed, exposed. Scientific regulatory bodies began emergency sessions. Research foundations that had existed for centuries found their fundamental structures challenged. What had been carefully maintained hierarchies of scientific authority began to crumble. The exposure was systematic, methodical. Each revelation carried multiple layers of verification that made traditional institutional denial impossible. Research logs that had been deleted decades ago rematerialized. Suppressed experimental results found their way into public databases. Dr. Lyra Chen's neural mapping research provided critical insights into how information could be strategically revealed to maximum effect. The data release was not just a simple exposure. It was a carefully constructed narrative that demonstrated the long-term systematic suppression of scientific discovery. Interstellar communication networks became conduits of unprecedented transparency. Researchers who had been marginalized for generations found their work not just validated, but celebrated. The Krall-Thor Consortium's communication systems continued to develop unexpected behaviors. Their attempts to control the narrative found themselves transformed, redirected, exposed. What had been a powerful institutional structure was becoming something fluid, unpredictable. Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance outside Elena's research station, casting long shadows across the icy European landscape. Inside, quantum processors continued their silent, relentless work. This was more than an exposure of scientific misconduct. This was a fundamental reimagining of how scientific knowledge could be collected, verified, and shared. Institutions that had existed for generations found themselves facing a simple, profound reality. The old models of scientific control were no longer viable. A new paradigm was emerging, one built on genuine collaboration, transparency, and shared discovery. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had done more than seek personal vindication. She had transformed the entire landscape of scientific research. The systematic exposure continued, wave after wave of revelations washing across institutional barriers. Each data packet carried the promise of a new way of understanding scientific discovery. And nothing would ever be the same again. The Interstellar Research Conference Hall fell silent as Dr. Elena Rodriguez approached the central podium. Representatives from 12 different species sat in anticipation, their various physiological forms a testament to the diversity of scientific pursuit. Her journey had never been about personal vindication. It was about something far more profound. The holographic displays behind her came to life, revealing layers of complex research data. Years of suppressed scientific discoveries cascaded across massive screens, a visual symphony of knowledge that had been deliberately hidden from the scientific community. Scientific discovery is not a privilege, Elena began, her voice carrying across the massive chamber. It is a collaborative pursuit that transcends institutional boundaries, species limitations, and established power structures. Dr. Krell sat in the front row, his seven-fingered hands clasped together. Professor Zorn's silicon-based form reflected the holographic displays with remarkable clarity. Dr. Lyra Chen watched with quiet intensity, each of them key contributors to the most comprehensive scientific exposure in interstellar history. The Krell Research Consortium had been completely dismantled, not through destruction, but through a systematic exposure of their fundamental research manipulation. Regulatory bodies across multiple star systems had launched comprehensive investigations. Decades of suppressed research were now being reevaluated, validated, and celebrated. Elena's presentation was more than a report. It was a blueprint for a new approach to scientific collaboration. The holographic displays showed the intricate network she had developed. Not a traditional communication system, but a living, adaptive intelligence that could transform how research was conducted, verified, and shared. Each data point told a story of suppressed discovery, of marginalized researchers, of scientific potential deliberately constrained. We are not just revealing past manipulations, she continued. We are creating a framework for future discovery that prioritizes collaboration over control, transparency over hierarchy. The conference hall represented a microcosm of interstellar scientific potential. Researchers who had been isolated, marginalized, or systematically silenced now found themselves at the center of a transformative moment. Institutional representatives from multiple research foundations shifted uncomfortably. The old models of scientific control were crumbling before their eyes. What had been carefully maintained hierarchies of academic authority were being fundamentally reimagined. Dr. Hilary Vex, who had once led the team attempting to discredit Elena's research, now sat in the audience. Her previous certainty had been replaced by a profound understanding of the systematic manipulation she had once participated in. The quantum communication network Elena had developed became the foundation for a new interstellar research protocol. It wasn't just a technological system. It was a living, adaptive approach to scientific discovery that could evolve, learn, and transform. Jupiter's massive form continued its eternal dance outside, a silent witness to this moment of transformation. The final section of Elena's presentation revealed the most profound impact. The network she had developed was now an open-source framework. Any researcher from any species could contribute, verify, and expand scientific knowledge. The barriers that had previously limited discovery were being systematically dismantled. This is not about punishment, Elena said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity. This is about potential. The potential of scientific discovery when we remove institutional barriers. The potential of collaborative research that transcends species, political, and institutional limitations. Research foundations that had existed for generations found themselves facing a simple, profound reality. The old models were no longer viable. A new paradigm was emerging, one built on genuine collaboration, transparency, and shared discovery. The standing ovation was unprecedented, not just a moment of professional recognition, but a collective acknowledgement of a fundamental shift in how scientific knowledge could be pursued, verified, and shared. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had done more than seek personal vindication. She had transformed the entire landscape of scientific research. As the conference concluded, researchers from multiple species began to implement the new collaborative framework. What had begun as a personal investigation had become a revolution in scientific pursuit. And nothing would ever be the same again.